December 9th. We'll go ahead and call the McHenry County Technical Advisory Committee to order. Starting with roll call, Steve Bicking.
Here.
Okay, Mike Von Bergen, not here. Al Schmidt.
Yes.
Mike Warner. Jody McCarthy.
Here.
Brian Valesky. Bruce Meyer.
Present.
Lori Ryan.
Here.
Dan Ziller. Here, Scott Pajak. Here. Spring Duffy. Jury duty. Ernest. Darren. Brad Andresen.
Here.
And then Tyler Wilkie. Okay, so we have our quorum. With that, we'll go ahead and move to agenda item number 2 for the minutes approval. Before I take a motion, I just want to let you guys know the county there, if you look at your minutes, we do have a disclaimer about our AI usage. So under each section, what you're going to find is more or less a summary. We're then directing folks to get, the actual, what people might have said, to the actual video. So just a little bit of a change there for you guys. I know all of you read everything in great detail, so just wanted to explain that before any motions are made, so. Okay, do I hear a motion for approval? Okay, moved by Bruce, seconded by Al. Any discussion? Okay, we'll go to vote. All in favor to approve, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it.
Same.
Brian will abstain. The ayes have it. Meeting minutes are approved. Okay. The next order of business, I don't think we have anyone from the public. Any members' comments at this time? See none. We'll go ahead and go to 5.1, 2026 schedule. So that is one of the first items in your packets. From the last discussion, you were looking to move it to the first Thursday. That seemed amenable to everyone, so I'm keeping the same time at 9:30. And the January 2026 date, that falls on New Year's. So if you guys want, we can have a discussion on whether or not we want to move that, or if you guys want to cancel that, and we'll have our first meeting in February. I will note that depending on how our discussion goes today, MCSC will have its first meeting in January to take a look at some of these concepts we've been discussing for the first time. So I can have some feedback from them, potentially make any changes with what's discussed here, and have something for you guys in February. So up to all of you. Hi, Mike.
Certainly.
It's okay. Glad you could make it.
I think it makes sense to cancel a January meeting and just have the first one of the year be in February.
Okay.
It
So
sounds like
do you want to make the motion?
I'll make a motion.
All right, Brad will make the motion to cancel January's meeting and keep the rest is. And obviously, as we continue forward, we can make adjustments. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, second by Lori. Any discussion? Okay, hearing none, we'll go ahead and move to vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Okay, the ayes have it. We'll set that schedule then. Okay. All right, we'll go ahead and move into another topic on the agenda, item 5.2. So if you guys looked at your packets ahead of time, I have a lot of exhibits in there. I need to explain what I put in there for you guys. Just bear with me. I think the easiest way is just to go through it step by step and kind of take your questions as you move along. This isn't clean by any means. It's just kind of the first step in the process. There's a lot of additional details that need to get worked out that I want to move into, but obviously this is kind of the initial steps. So if there's a question that I feel that, yes, we need to answer that, but, maybe we'll let me go through everything. I'll write it down. We can circle back to it and kind of move the discussion along.
Anybody want a paper copy before we get going?
Everybody have paper copies? I mean, they have it up on the screen too, but obviously it's a little bit easier in front of you. Okay. So we've written the section here. A lot of it is the same, but I'll just go through the changes. So the first change is we're just looking to change the, so nothing really to discuss there. So then what we get into here in this section is the exemption from stormwater detention. So what we're, so I do apologize actually, now looking at this. Actually, we're good, okay. A lot of effort went into this. So the first exemption would be that your site creates 1 acre or less of new impervious area, and you need to show that the increase in your peak flow between proposed and existing conditions is not greater than 0.5 cubic feet per second. Some of the exhibits that go on later, I'll go into that number, but that if we want to discuss that number, we can later. So how we got there, it's coming, just bear with me. And then we want to maintain those existing drainage patterns. We don't want to be changing those. So those are the two conditions. If the development is able to meet that along with the 1 acre, then you're avoiding detention. So this goes along the basics with the previous of the 10% up to 1 acre. In this case, we removed the 10%. We're putting it as a secondary option, and I'll kind of go, I'll give you guys some more details as to the concepts behind breaking those out.
Could you make it a little bigger, please?
Yes, absolutely. Just make sure I can fit it on the screen. So number one was 1 acre or less with the 0.5 cubic feet per second increase or less. Existing conditions and drainage patterns are not changed. The second exemption is you can go up to 10% of your property is impervious. And again, it just holds the same concepts. No greater than 0.5 cubic feet per second increase, and you're maintaining those existing drainage patterns. The public road development, we didn't change. I didn't look at this section too much. I was focusing on these other components. So, and again, I'll touch on those. I just kind of want to go through this with you guys. The allowable release rates then, that is very similar. Help yourselves.
Not a bad reason for being late.
Acceptable. Ernest?
No, I would have been here on time, some darn, the IDOT had a truck breakdown on 120, and they were limping it.
Yes, that's the one I got stuck behind too.
Thank you for joining us, and thank you for the treats.
Thank you so much.
Brian, that's for you, because you missed the October meeting.
Didn't even want to open that.
That's your choice.
It's pretty hilarious.
I'll save it for the end of the meeting. In case it smells.
Thank you. All right, welcome Darren too.
Thanks. Sorry, wait.
That's okay. You guys didn't miss a bunch. Just to recap, we approved the calendar as was in the agenda and the minutes. So since you guys are both joining us, I'm going to back up just a quick second and go over this for both Darren and Ernest, if that's okay with the group. So I'm just going through, there's a lot of exhibits in your packet for both of you that I have to run through. I didn't provide explanations, but I'm going to go, connect the dots for you guys, hopefully. But here's some of the main changes that were made is changing the impervious threshold from 20,000 square feet to 0.5 acre, just to be more consistent, a small change there. Then the exemption for detention would be adding up to 1 acre of new impervious, as long as your peak flow from existing conditions is not increased by more than 0.5 cubic feet per second, and you're maintaining the existing drainage patterns. The second exemption available is a 10% increase, holding the same parameters to avoid detention, and then the public road development is not touched. The allowable release rates, that is similar from what we discussed last time. So we're looking at the new impervious areas, the hydrologic disturbance, the 2-year and 100-year reductions, 0.85, 0.20, and then for hydrologic clearance of like a wetland area or a tree, wooded area would be 0.3. Again, those are subject to discussion and change. So one of the big additions here, and again, this language is not finalized by any means, just trying to look how much time and everything I had going on to get it in here, but one of the concerns was, doing these reductions, you go to 0 or negative, what are we gonna do? So this is the hierarchy that we discussed as staff is, okay, well, first off, you wanna try to maintain your existing drainage patterns. As I show you guys in some of the examples, the reason why, or one of the reasons why you're getting that 0 or negative reduction is because you're consolidating tributary area, didn't go there before, you're changing patterns. So trying to maintain those. Number 2 is trying to use infiltration if feasible, because obviously then you're not really releasing downstream, everything's infiltrating down. And then if that is not feasible, your allowable release rate would be the 2-year existing peak. And that can be a 1 orifice release instead of the 2. Again, open for discussion, but that is the hierarchy to kind of get around that problem. So with that, I'm gonna jump back to the way that the exhibits are calculated and jumping back to this 9.5 cubic feet per second. What we tried to do, the thought process was to run an analysis using a generic swale and ditch. So we went with just a 3-foot bottom, 3-to-1 side slopes, and said, what would the flow rate be at a 0.1 depth? The reason we're looking at the 0.1 is a lot of our flood hazard, floodplain FEMA training, a lot of DOT type stuff. You're looking at flood heights not increasing more than 1/10 as being acceptable. So that's kind of the thought process here is if we know the flows in some of our more, basic, like a 3-foot swale with 3-to-1 side slopes. I mean, DOT guys, you probably don't see much of those. You're probably seeing a little bit wider and a little bit bigger, right? So if we know that it's handled in this condition with this flow rate, so the flow rate that you get is about 0.6 CFS. So that was the idea, is that we would have comfort that whatever the downstream infrastructure is, you're seeing that negligible increase in flood heights and calling it, minimal flood risks to flooding.
Can I ask I'll call it a sidebar question on this point.
Okay.
We're having an issue out on Lakewood Road. The issue is there's a set of existing double box culverts, and it serves Lakewood Road, no problem. We had an issue we want to widen a bit to put in a bike path because we're going to be working on Lakewood Road, and try as we may with Lakewood, they're like, no, you can't just widen it. You can't just put on another section box. You have no calcs, and we do have no calcs. There are no calcs from when it was put in. Mm-hmm. So we got nothing, okay? But it's functional. And it's not as though, we're changing the length of the structure, but we're not constricting, we're not open, nothing. We backed off, we're gonna have to guardrail our trail across it. It became past history. Now, there's a development coming in. They need to modify the lane width because of their bringing in traffic. And they're saying, well, we'll just slap 2 of these things on the end here and widen. We're like, Lakewood won't let you. Is there any way to, since they're a certified community, is there any way to nicely appeal to you guys and say, if, you were just saying, something that is existing, it's functional, it doesn't flood, but we have no documentation. And is there any way to take an existing and say, let's just expand? Or is it, sorry, you gotta go through the whole process?
Why don't we have that discussion after?
Fair enough. Well, it just dawned on me as you were going through that.
Well,
I'm sorry.
again, this is not meant to analyze infrastructure, it's just meant to give you guys an idea that if a particular site says, hey, I wanna have up to an acre of new impervious, my increase from my existing to proposed peak flow rate is that half CFS or less, here's what it would look like if you were to, and obviously this is assuming, not full flow. If you assume that you've already got 3 inches in there or whatever, your flow is actually gonna increase because you're gonna have additional area because of the site slope. So just to clarify, that's why I didn't give you guys, different depth variances. But that's for a ditch. We also ran flow rates for different pipes. So we ran kind of 2 scenarios, 3 different pipes, 12, 18, 24 at 0.5, so about 0.5% there. So here's what you get for the average flows. And again, we know that the 12-inch here is gonna probably show, and these are the averages. So what you're seeing here is at a 0.1 depth, here's the flow. At a 0.2 depth, here's the flow. And here's the differences. So if that, in existing conditions, that 12-inch pipe was at, 6 inches full when it runs, then a 0.32 CFS would give you that 0.1 increase. So we just averaged these. And obviously at the tail ends here, you're gonna see a drop off. There's less area in the pipe. But again, for some of you DOT folks, I don't know how many 12-inch pipes you have controlling those. I think you're probably more likely to see 15 or 18 as kind of the minimum, or even bigger. And so that's why we did the 3 scenarios at 0.5%. And then we flattened it just to show what that would look like if you had something that basically is flat in a situation where you know that there's a potential issue. But, factoring those in, you're more likely to probably have to adverse slope or make a correction there as part of the project and leave it as is. But so that's what we were trying to highlight with these calculations here. So that was the idea, to give you guys some data to feel comfortable, and that half CFS target, again, it's adjustable, but here's the data to give you guys an idea how some of this functions. Any questions so far before I move to the next portion? Okay, good. The next set of analysis that we wanted to run was just to give you guys an idea. If we take 1 acre of tributary flow area, what we did was we took 1 acre, 5 acres, 10, and then a 50, I think I did. Let's see here. Yeah, and then a 50, and a 20. We wanted to take the 3 different curve numbers. So curve number of 75, kind of representing what you would find in like an average ag field, or if you're thinking of that curve number table, kind of undeveloped area. And take a look at curve number 65 and 55, keeping time of concentration in 5 minutes being the most restrictive again. So we want to demonstrate was, okay, what are the expected kind of flow rate differences if we were to say, okay, if you're going to a site where you don't have any impervious and it's all pervious, and what is your flow rate? And then you start to hit some of those triggers. So that half acre, so this was more or less to feel comfortable with the half acre increase and kind of justify the 10% and some of those calculations. So what we're looking at here is just ramping up the numbers. At the flow rate here, the difference is the flow rate at these impervious numbers. So for 1 acre, we did 0, half and half, 0.75, and then 1 and a full acre. And then the flow rate would be, you're taking the flow rate here, and then the difference would be back to the existing condition. Yes.
Question, what storm event are you looking at for
100,
these?
sorry, 100-year, 24-hour.
And is that kind of the unwritten rule in all of this, is that we're always looking at the 100-year, 24-hour storm event?
I want to show you guys what the 2-year looks like, but obviously the 100-year is going to be the one that we're going to focus on. So after I kind of go through everything with the next, coming back to you guys, I do want to show what the 2 years look like for you guys too. I just didn't want to run it all because I feel like if we can't, if the 100-year works, we should be able to then go back and say, okay, and the methodology, the process on the 100-year, we can apply to the 2-year. But yes, this is just 100-year, 24-hour storm.
So we would not look at any other duration storm events that would be more of like a critical duration for smaller lots with lower times of concentration.
Oh, in this I didn't. In this I was just trying to show the idea that if we use this curve number analogy of analyzing it, instead of saying we have this static release rate, we look at existing conditions, use curve numbers, look at proposed conditions, use curve numbers. Here's kind of
It's like a proof of concept.
proof of concept, yeah, because I think there was a lot of discussion, like obviously, well, if I lower my curve number enough, right? And that's something that we're trying to promote through green infrastructure, and that's some of the details that we want to work out. We have a rough idea of some curve numbers and get into some of those discussions. We have in a lot of the examples, I'm just using what some of the information came in from actual projects just to show like, okay, for a lower curve number, higher curve number, and just run through a scenario from an engineering perspective. If you guys were to approach this and had to put a design together or anyone looking to do that, here's what they would anticipate. So yeah, this is mostly just proof of concept and just demonstrating. So it demonstrates a couple of things. Number one is, and as you'll see, I think I jump out of this half acre when I get to the larger sites, but if we feel good about that calculation that I showed earlier about the ditches and the 12-inch pipe, scenarios, you can see some of those flow rate increases are very minor in consideration to the idea that we're going to have less than a tenth of increase in this infrastructure in the high water tables, which would lead us to conclude that there's minimal flood risks, right? So I think it verifies the idea that half an acre as a threshold is fine. There's no concerns there. Going up to 1 acre is fine. There's no concerns there. But again, it just depends on maintaining those existing drainage areas, right? What you'll notice though is where you could start getting to issues is once you get to a site that is maybe more pristine, a wooded area, or an area that has wetlands on it, right? Those existing to proposed, you're gonna have a lot more increases. And so this process, this method helps account for the loss of those resources, which you wouldn't with our current method, because our current method, again, it's just a static release rate. It does not focus on existing conditions and what's there and kind of trying to quantify the benefit of what you might be losing as opposed to gaining a detention basin back.
We use this during our internal discussions, and we all found this to be very helpful to have real-world scenarios to illustrate how this actually works. And one of the main things coming out of this is that our current system provides really no incentive to reduce impacts. And this takes by taking into account current conditions, you are actually incentivizing a reduced impact through this process by taking it into consideration. So I'm a non-engineer, and going through the scenarios really helped me understand the concept of following the curve numbers and integrating that into our practices. So we really found this to be very helpful, these scenarios.
What model was used? Was it like HMS or TR20?
Just HydroCAD, just a free version.
So like a SCS.
Yeah, let me, I'll show you real quick, just so you can.
To kind of build on Darren's question, I think, so usually when we're reviewing something and looking at it from analyzing downstream capacity or not increasing flow to adjacent properties, we don't just stick with the 100-year 24-hour or even 2-year 24-hour. We normally require a critical duration analysis in order to truly analyze that there's no adverse impacts downstream. Like if we're comparing apples to apples, to make sure that in every scenario, we'll pick like 2, 10, 25, 50, 100, especially if it's a flood problem area or litigious neighbors or something like that. So that's where I'm thinking about this comparison of existing versus proposed, just from what the engineer would propose, in their packet, and then what we would review. It just seems like it would be potentially a lot of calculations if we were to not just take the 100-year 24-hour, but the critical duration. Because we do find sometimes, say when you size an overflow where it's a 100-year 1-hour storm, that is really what gives you your peak flow.
Right, well, I guess to your point, I would anticipate coming back to the language previously, that we would probably write a parameter in there giving the enforcement officer an ability to modify that release rate based on known flooding risks or issues downstream. I think that would be appropriate for that, but I think, for the current ordinance, you're right, the critical duration, at least when we review it, the critical duration comes into play when you're talking about bypass and the overflow that you have to model. Here, you're only running 100-year 24-hour and 2-year 24-hour. You do have to run the existing and proposed. So it is one additional modeling step of running the existing, which in most cases you're probably going to have the information available to you. And the idea here is that if you're depending on the existing conditions of your site, the better it is from a curb number perspective, the less likely you are to be able to meet it, which is taking into account those resources that are out there currently and not destroying them. Did that answer your question, or?
No, it was more of a statement.
Okay.
Yeah, and I guess, I concur with that. The 24 hours more for when you have a basin that's attenuating your flows, then you're gonna see your peaks happening at the 24-hour event, which is why a lot of times that's basically specified as to what you use. But if you don't have a basin there, your peak in this case is probably gonna be, it's typically like 3 times your time of concentration. So you could have a 15-minute peak with this existing conditions analysis and the proposed condition. And that peak is gonna be a lot higher because the storm intensity is a lot higher.
Well, I'll get into the examples so you guys can see, step by step how you would analyze it. But this is just meant to kind of go back to the exemption component. So I'm not focusing on.
You're trying to exempt yourself from detention, right? Isn't that what we're trying to do?
You're trying to exempt yourself
From a permit.
from having to
Right.
put in a stormwater detention
So once you
basin.
trigger it, you're triggered.
Right. But I mean, and I guess when you go with 5 minutes, the existing
Well,
release
this
is
is
gonna
not, you would have to I'll just jump into this real quick. So in the solar farm example, your time of concentration will be based on these flow patterns in the existing and proposed. So it wouldn't be a 5 minute. This is just, I'm just taking worst case scenario that you have a 5 minute concentration. That's the idea behind some of these generic.
But in generally the existing is gonna have a longer TC than the proposed, because the proposed, you're adding impervious area.
Correct.
And if it's like a parking lot or building, that's gonna shorten up your flow length wells.
Yes,
So you might have a 15-minute TC and then a 5-minute TC.
in the proposed,
Right,
correct.
which is gonna affect the numbers.
Correct.
That way,
And that's where I would say that if, you know, what you would be doing in this scenario is if you would run your existing conditions and use the atomic concentration of 15, you would run your proposed condition, atomic concentration of 5, and compare the two. If your proposed increases the flow rate by more than half a CFS, you are not exempt from having to provide detention.
Okay,
That's,
Or some other measure.
or some other measure to, you know, green infrastructure, et cetera. So that's the idea behind these calcs.
Steve, we're not trying to prove anything we already know.
right.
Right. It was just more or less to show at varying curve numbers what your flow rate difference is. So what you're gonna see, the theme is a site that is more brown site or has existing impervious is gonna have a higher curve number. So adding impervious area, this flow difference is gonna be negligible. So if you know as the enforcement officer that there isn't any current downstream concerns that you're flooding and things like that, then you feel confident that their increases are gonna be a minimal impact to that flooding risk. However, if they're going to a site that is more heavily vegetated, wetlands, et cetera, those hydrologic conditions are gonna operate at the slower curve number. Maybe even it's gonna be lower than 55. Again, that's something we need to discuss for some of those resources. Then your flow rate increase is gonna be higher than that half CFS, which is telling you, hey, you're impacting some high value existing resources. You're not exempt. You have to go back and figure out, you know, a different plan, rearrange, and it just goes back to some of the ideas of preserving, right, open space, green infrastructure. That's what the WDO in Lake County does, that's what Kane County does, that's what the current ordinance does as a way of handling runoff, volume, and all of that stuff. So this is just applying some metrics to give us confidence that, hey, yeah, we can feel comfortable with those numbers moving forward. And we have an ability to explain to the public and give them confidence that this, you know, the math works behind some of these concepts. So I'll just go through this and I'll jump because I think you guys are getting the idea here. But here's 5 acres, again, just showing the differences at that half as you vary the numbers. Here's the overall curve number. Again, I'm just using 75 for pervious, 65 for pervious, 98 is your impervious. So you guys can see what ends up happening here. So this was my point to the 1 acre or the 10%, is that in some cases, if you can get that 10%, so like like this 10 acre, the 10% would still be 1 acre. But if we go to the 20 acres, or even the 20 acres here, that 10% would get you 2 acres, right? Yes.
Yeah.
So, yes.
Are you gonna present these tables? Not to this group, but to, stormwater?
To the committee?
Yeah.
Probably, but I'll probably refine it.
I would recommend adding percent change.
Percent change, okay. Yes, I'll probably need to think about how I, you know, demonstrate that to them, but yes, I'll probably have some of the municipal members, they're sending their engineers, so they are gonna have some of that technical, but obviously for the committee members. But it just shows, like, it's just verifying that 10%, again, still legitimate as long as you get that half CFS. So that's what this is meant to demonstrate. And then if you're working on 20 acres, but again, that curve number drops, you can see that even at 1 acre, you're over that half CFS, which is basically indicating like, hey, you've got some resources there that you're getting rid of. We want to try to preserve those areas. Could be wooded areas that have taken 50 years to develop, 100 years to develop, right? Just wiping those out, trying to get back to them. So that's what this shows, and then when we go to even the 50 acre, again, I dropped out of that half, but you can see some of the numbers and some of those flow rate differences. So if you were to try to go to the 10% to get to 5, that flow rate difference is gonna kick in there. So just because you can get 10% doesn't mean you can get the full 10%. What you would have to request is, even the 3 acres is gonna kick you over. So in this particular situation, if you had an existing, and I think one of the examples I brought to you guys, I did find like a 80 acre that all drained to one point, but if you have a 50 acre tributary area, it all kind of goes to one point, you wouldn't be able to take advantage of the full 10%. You'd probably, a little bit less than 3 acres impervious before you trigger detention. And then obviously, the lower the curve number. Sound like a broken record maybe, but someone had a question. Yeah.
So I'm still just trying to get my head around this. So when you're leaving the time of concentration the same, and we're just looking at the 24-hour event, that flow rate difference on the right is really just reflective of the fact that there's more volume in the hydrograph, right? We're not changing, like development, as we're going from impervious areas, and as you're going from like in this, I'm looking at the upper chart there, from 0% impervious all the way down to 100% impervious at 50 acres of impervious. So we're not changing the time of concentration at all.
I'm not. I was trying to actually do this more for curve numbers.
So it's just we're just here looking at essentially the only thing that's changing in these hydrographs is the volume under the hydrograph, but we're then looking at flow rates on the far right side.
Correct. So like, you're right. So in the existing conditions, the time of concentration, let's say, is 20 minutes, and the proposed conditions, because you've added all impervious, would drop down. So I can show some of those scenarios, but what this was meant to drive is the idea of using curve numbers and assessing existing versus proposed, just showing what that looks like to the flow rates was the main idea.
When I think of changing curve numbers and looking at existing and proposed conditions, I'm thinking more volume-wise. Like if I'm looking at flow rates, I think about how the change from pervious to impervious affects things like really the time of concentration. Water is getting sped to, in this case here, if we're going from 0 to 50 acres of impervious, we probably have inlets, storm sewers. The time of concentration is probably changing significantly. And in my mind, if we were to look at time of concentration here, the flow rate difference would be multiples of what we're seeing there.
Well, that's why I just kept it at 5 minutes. It's like, you're not gonna get anything below 5 minute, right? That's gonna produce your highest flows. So yes, if I was to change this, these would come down.
But I'm thinking like if for 0 impervious, you'd be looking at a time of concentration of an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours.
Yeah, I can make them more realistic. And so the point is, once I get into the examples, that's exactly what you're doing. But the idea was to highlight, time of concentration 5 minutes, what happens with your different curve numbers. You can see the decreases in the flow rates, and you're capturing the idea that if you just allow a blank exemption, you don't factor in existing conditions, you could be removing high-value resources and replacing them with nothing. You're not capturing that. You're not processing that. You're not analyzing that under the current guidelines. So that's something that we want to promote as part of these changes, is to say, if you're, like I said, the curve number of this 75, to give you guys an idea, is like an agricultural field, more or less, ranges from like 72 to 78, depending on the conditions. Are you leaving the residue, or are you not? So obviously, if you increase this number, you're getting into some more developed areas, it's been dilapidated, whatever you have, right? You're not necessarily protecting old dilapidated areas that have gravel and things like that. What you do want to protect is more highly functioning areas. And by having this analysis, you're requiring the applicants to do that and then saying, hey, you're not exempted because that flow rate difference is how it's kind of captured. Right? You're gonna have and that's why I didn't, obviously this itself varying 3 curve numbers, trying to keep it simple, there's a lot of variables. Yeah, I can go further and just assume a time of concentration as we move through this, if you guys wanna see certain examples, email me. I think that's the part that I'm looking for you guys. If there's something in your mind that's sticking out, give me the scenario, give me the example, right? Send it to me. I'd love to run it so that you guys can see and have the data as to kind of what you think are some of the hurdles. Because I can only anticipate so much with my staff and kind of the things, and we've been looking at it for a long time, and we get tunnel visioned, and then you guys come back and say, well, what about this? But you're not wrong, yeah. But that was primarily why we decided to not vary the time of concentrations, was just a simple exercise to show the curve number, just looking at curve numbers specifically over small areas, big areas, what those flow differences are, tying it back to that idea of what it would look like in downstream infrastructure, and whether or not that half CFS requirement, does that need to be adjusted? Does it come up? Does it come down? That's kind of the concept, and also the concept between maintaining existing drainage patterns. Because what you could have happen is, you could have a scenario, I'll just go to the 50.
Sorry to interrupt, could you say what the rainfall amount is for that? Are you using bulletin?
Yeah, bulletin 75.
75?
So 8.57.
Okay, thanks.
100 year, 24 hour, 8.57, something like that. What you could have is, if you're changing existing drainage patterns, then your curve number, you could be, in that existing conditions, you could be down at a curve number of 59, but now because you're combining a lot more, your curve number also increases, right? So that was the idea here, was to generate the half CFS component for you guys. So we modeled the ditch, we modeled the pipe, and then the concept of maintaining existing drainage patterns and maintaining, high functioning vegetated areas as part of that, and showing you the differences in if you don't do that, essentially to kind of confirm the concept that we should be analyzing existing conditions as part of our stormwater detention requirements. With this. Why don't I jump into some of the examples, and then we can.
Is the fact that does it have any bearing on the amount of acreage that you're analyzing? Because, when you're at 1 acre, you've got these really small runoff amounts, and then as you go to 50, the flow rates increase faster.
Yeah, I mean, yes, that would be the idea. And it's not to say, it just depends how much you're modifying that 50 acre, right? And yes, at lower areas, you're gonna have smaller flow rates, you just have less area.
So the 0.5 CFS?
Yes.
Is that, you might have mentioned this, is that per acre or is that total?
Total. So it doesn't matter if you're 1 acre or 50 acre, you analyze your existing, you analyze your proposed, you look at the difference. And if you're a half CFS or less, that gives you the confidence that whatever you're draining. So this also would essentially remove the adequate downstream capacity component, in essence.
So wouldn't your 1 acre scenario never need detention?
Well, potentially, unless your curb number in existing conditions is a wetland in a vegetated area, and then you're coming in and saying, I'm just gonna clear it and do impervious, you can see it starts to get up to that half CFS. And that's where, do we wanna modify that half CFS? Should it be 0.4? You know, that's where I think I wanna drive the discussion, but it's first giving you guys some proof of concept and then getting into the details of what the right targets are.
I think maybe we have to put this in the perspective of what I think the county's trying to do with it. This isn't gonna apply to most development, right? This is not gonna apply to our Walmarts or Chubasco's, whatever, you know what I mean? It's not a box development. This is gonna apply to some newer situation, maybe a solar farm, or maybe an agricultural area where they're trying to really minimize their need to use standard infrastructure to address an issue. So those of us who may be EOs, this is gonna be something we see maybe once a year. I'm just trying to give you some
Okay, so what,
perspective of this is more of a special case rather than a standardized procedure, although it's being codified as a standard procedure to give you some ammunition.
okay, I misunderstood. So what applies to Walmarts then?
Your standard detention scenarios.
Okay.
Unless
Well,
you
then
can make your
Unless you have a
I would've led
design.
with that.
Walmart
I think I
so
would've led with that.
impervious that it wouldn't apply.
Well,
I think you're hitting the nail on the head, actually.
So the idea here is, again, I'm focusing on the exemption part of detention. So that's what these calculations are meant to show is if you.
Or I'm completely off base.
No, I think you're hitting the nail on the head.
This can apply, but are you ever gonna have a scenario where you're gonna go from a vacant site to a Walmart that's gonna be at what, 70% impervious, 80, I don't even know?
You know.
Well, okay, let's say 75%.
How many of those did you design
impervious.
before you came here?
Are you ever gonna find yourself in a scenario where you're gonna have availability to a design to show that your proposed versus existing from a vacant site to a Walmart site is ever gonna be half CFS?
Okay, I get what you're saying now. I don't see where it explains the difference between like a Walmart site and then this section.
You're gonna need a flow chart, basically, where this is gonna bubble off of your standard flow chart.
So it's like what it says right there, unless the conditions of 1, 2, or 3 are met.
Correct.
Okay, gotcha.
Right, and that's what, there's two kind of concepts to that, to saying you don't trigger detention, number one, if you're maintaining existing conditions and drainage patterns, and number two, you're minimizing that flow rate increase. Because in the previous, if you guys, let's see, what's the previous says that the applicant needs to demonstrate to the satisfaction of the enforcement officer that the development shall not result in flood damage. And it didn't provide any standard as to how do you demonstrate that. And what all engineers did was really compare existing versus proposed. And I would open it up to all of you guys that are engineers, if you know of a method or technique of doing that, then by all means, let's discuss it. So what staff looked at was, okay, well, how do we demonstrate that there will be no flood damage? That's why we went to 1/10 of an increase in flood heights is the general accepted practice for floodplain, flood hazard type projects. So we went and we analyzed different conditions in ditch flow and pipe flow to figure out what 1/10 of an increase would be. Now, is the half CFS exact? No, it's not, but you know, it's ballpark type of thing. And then maintaining existing drainage conditions and patterns because of the fact of, again, increasing tributary areas to a certain location and increasing curve numbers to a certain location are gonna affect those. And that's what this secondary concept was meant to show. Keep time of concentration the same, vary your curve numbers to show you guys how those flow rates are being modified. So from this perspective, we can take in existing conditions where, you know, you're looking at a curve number of 65, here's your flow rate, 3.31. In proposed conditions, they're proposing to do, let's just say go to 4 acres, well, you're at 4.67, so you're over that, you know, you're almost 1 CFS over, so you're not gonna be exempt, you have to provide detention. That would be the analysis for the Walmart, right? The Walmart would be, let's just say it's a 50-acre site, so we'll just do it right here, a 50-acre site. Existing conditions is, I don't know, 61, we'll just go with the 55 here. Maybe you have some impervious, let's just assume there's no impervious, you have a flow rate of 2557. In proposed conditions, you're adding 40 acres of impervious, it's gonna bump your curve number up to 75. You're almost doubling that CFS. There's no way you avoid detention. And, you know, and we can have these type of charts available for easier kind of use for you guys, but, you know, once you kind of go through that, and also I should mention, we do plan on putting online tools available for you guys. So you can go in, click, get your tributary area, get your flow path, you know, it'll calculate based on the contours, time of concentration, you plug it in, we'll spit out your existing flow rate. You can do the same thing for your proposed, you just have to factor in your curve number. And you'll get that comparison, probably, you know, once we get it running smoothly, it'd probably take you guys 5 minutes to do that analysis. And you'll know if you meet the exemption or not, right? And then if you don't meet the exemption, that's where you go to the allowable release rate component, which is the examples I have next.
Or if you're close, you can run a scenario to get you to that
Right.
point, you know, just to Brian's point. Part of the focus here is we've been asked to provide greater flexibility so that everybody doesn't get hit automatically with detention. And this is a way of incentivizing that reduction and making things easier for people with who have the ability to have less impacts. It provides a guidepost on how to get there that doesn't exist in our current systems.
So you always have the opportunity as the designer to punch in your proposed conditions, time of concentration, curve number, to show that you're less than the half CFS. If you have a design that can do that, I mean, you're probably already incorporating ways to slow down your flow rate and capture that flow rate. Obviously, infiltration does that, right? So if you can do that with infiltration, you know, then you can figure out how much, you know, permeable pavers you're gonna need, right, to size that and capture that and go through that whole exercise. So it's not like you're avoiding it, you're basically doing that, but you're just trying to use green infrastructure and other tools available instead of just a detention basin. However, if you do need to use detention, that's where this next step comes into play. So I've tried to kind of recirculate some of these just because you guys have familiarity with it, but I'm just gonna go through kind of step by step here with you guys. So,
Just get a quick question.
Yeah.
So there was a comment made that this is gonna be seen more in an agricultural area than in a Walmart area. So we're trying to, we would like it to see it be easier for us to put up a new building or a grain facility or whatever. Is this gonna make it, are we gaining or losing by these numbers you're
no,
using?
it's similar for everyone, Dan. What Brian is saying is that the Walmart, are not gonna be, there's, I don't wanna say 0%, 0.001% chance that they're able to obtain the exemptions. Whereas your agricultural communities that are, hey, I need a new pole barn over here because of my operations and I wanna store equipment, and I need enough space and I need a gravel drive, and all of a sudden your impervious ticks up to that half acre, but you're able to demonstrate that that addition comparatively to your entire site is going to be minimal flood risk, there's gonna be no flood damage, you're gonna be more likely to be able to claim that exemption. So for a lot of the enforcement officers that work in municipalities, your municipalities don't have a lot of agricultural spaces. So to Brian's point, the likelihood of them seeing an exemption come through is gonna be less. So that's clarification there to what Brian was saying. So no, it is what kind of the board is directed in terms of having that flexibility and opportunity. But it is equal opportunity, as I said, if the Walmart designer can find a way to do that with a design that works, by all means, that's perfectly acceptable, yeah.
Before you start the examples, going back to number 2, you struck the language on the agriculture conservation easement. Is that going away then, or is that still going to be an option?
Going away.
Okay.
Do not need to do an easement. What you're basically showing is that your site is capable, your site is, again, your development shall not result in flood damage.
Okay.
You're going up to as much as 10%,
Right,
almost
right,
5.
right.
And we did the conservation easements that are going to go away, they'll just be recorded here. And so Dan, to your point, if you got a 20-acre site, you can only do a half-acre impervious before it's going to possibly go up to 10%. And with no record of any conservation easements, but you may have to prove you got to keep the flow less than half.
Right.
The CFS, which all means you may have to add some grass areas where it was corn before, or soybeans.
Put hay there.
Hay.
But those are some details we'll have to flesh out that I do want to discuss. But again, this is just meant to, as a foundational piece, and like I said, this is working language. Probably needs touch up from the wording and everything, but just wanted to get a basic foundation down, right? Basic pan code or whatever analogy you want to use, to just get us there so that we can start to get into those nuanced conversations and figure out, are these the correct targets? Let us develop some curve number tables for you guys. Okay, so then we have everything fleshed out, then I can come back, update these examples, email me any other examples that you want to see that are rolling around your head, Ernest, whatever you might, have. And, I can bring it and we can run it through and show how that analysis will work, what the results are. Is it what we're intending? Is it what we want? Are we creating that flexibility? Are we removing barriers and still having confidence that we're minimizing flood damage and minimizing flood risks? Or are there some hurdles we still need to touch up on, examples, things like that? So that's kind of the goal for today's session, is to move us kind of into that next leg. That's something I'd also like to prep for MCSC in January. For those of you that weren't here, the new schedule, we're moving to the first Thursday. That's going to be New Year's Day. The board voted to, or the quorum that was present voted to just cancel that January date, so the first one would be in February. So I will have some additional input, then I'll have some updates for you guys, and I'll have additional input from the committee to make sure that they obviously have direction for us. Are we still on track? Do we need to incorporate other ideas? And, hopefully that February date, then we can potentially get to that finalized idea and get this amendment knocked out. And as I mentioned previously, this idea will help eliminate the adequate downstream capacity components of the ordinance. Haven't touched on that either, on kind of how this is all moving along, but we had a situation this year where that became a big problem for us, the adequate downstream capacity as it's written. If you guys remember from previous meetings, I had proposed some amendment language to touch that up. This would potentially take care of that requirement, not fully, because I still think we have to, that the EOs have an ability to address known flooding issues and enact stricter requirements if needed. But it will smooth out that process, which is one of the reasons why that was written, because on these 50-acre parcels, you're consolidating tributary area, and now it's producing more flow in that particular existing condition, the 100-year flow might now resemble the proposed 2-year flow. And so that adequate downstream capacity, was my understanding how that came into effect. So
these charts then, you should, like, say for the 10 acre, if it's only supposed to be 10%, the 2 through 10 really are not applicable at all, because those scenarios couldn't happen under the exemption.
I just, for curve number purposes, again, just to show like this curve number idea, is it valid, does it make sense, what does it look like? I felt like that was kind of the main drive, but yes, you can see I tried to do that 0.5, but I can come back and touch these up. I can throw some different time of concentrations for the folks that want to see some scenarios. Again, that's the feedback I'd like from you guys. And I think that, to your point, that's something that again, when I put this together, it was like, man, that was a lot of data. Like, just just organizing it and using, staff as guinea pigs. So yes, some of this information you guys are giving me for the layout of the table is helpful. I'll throw in where does that 10% number lie? Where's the half acre lie? What are those flow differences? Maybe I'll vary the time of concentration, and I won't do so many. Maybe I'll do 1 acre, 10 and 50 or something, or 20. Maybe 50's too much. So I will definitely do that. Yes.
I think you probably also need to run a critical duration analysis, because it talks about the existing peak flow, and that's not going to be the 24-hour storm.
Well, I think that's where then in the language we'll have to put existing 100-year, 24-hour peak flow. Because if we're doing critical, then to Jody's point, the analysis becomes a lot more labor intensive. But that's not the goal. The goal is just to look at, like, detention handles 100-year, 24 hours. So those are the scenario, 100-year, 24-hour, 2-year, 24-hour. Those are the storm events we want to be looking at, unless you guys feel that we want to be incorporating critical duration as part of this analysis in some fashion.
I think if the idea is comparing flow rates, you need to do a critical duration analysis.
So then you would need to do critical and existing, critical and proposed.
Right.
And that's what you guys think the analysis should be, as opposed to just 100-year, 24-hour?
I mean, once you have your model set up, whatever you're using, you should be able to put all the storms into it, and then you just need to vary your time of concentration.
So I'm not opposed to that. I just don't know, is that too much analysis? Like, do you think it's necessary to go to the critical instead of?
I would say from a liability standpoint, I think that's what all the engineers are just circling around, and there's no way to get around it.
Liability to who?
I think you're gonna see that your flow rate differential is gonna be significantly different than what's portrayed here. Because a longer TC and a critical duration, the longer TC is gonna generate lower rainfall intensities. And then you go to a shorter duration, a shorter TC, you're gonna get higher rainfall. So you've got two things working against your peak flow in that scenario.
I don't disagree with the time of concentration, but I think what you guys, if what you would find here is then your time of concentration in the existing, right, this is gonna come down because you're at 20 minutes, and then these are gonna increase. So these flow rate differences are gonna go up.
Right, but they're also gonna go up because the critical duration analysis, the shorter duration storms that you're gonna end up with in a proposed condition have a higher intensity.
Right, but are you concerned that if I don't run those, that you're going to be at a higher flood risk? Because your 100-year, 24-hour peak differences are less than the half CFS. let's say your 1 hour controls for both and it's higher than 1 CFS. Are you gonna say that, well, actually, you're at a higher risk of flooding in that scenario?
If it's a half CFS or whatever you're allowing, I don't see that as the issue. I just think you're gonna be capturing a lot fewer scenarios than you think you are when you go to a half CFS and compare your critical duration storms. There's not gonna be that many that are gonna work out this way where you can just, there's not gonna be that many scenarios, even at a 75 curve number, where you're allowed to go to 50% impervious. It's probably not gonna work.
Which then you trigger detention. I'm just trying to avoid having to do, for the exemption, I'm trying to avoid to have to do too much analysis. And if you have to go to the, if you're trying to do critical duration, I mean, you're probably looking at the 1 or 2 hour storm, let's be honest, right?
Well, for a smaller site, it could be a 15-minute storm event.
Yeah, but I don't know that.
In the proposed
we
condition.
want to go to a 15-minute. Do we want to go to a 15-minute?
I make people go to a 15-minute.
Okay.
I mean, that's the shortest duration
Well,
they
I can come-
have, so.
So I think for something that small though, for that amount of rain, for what you're talking about, again, if you aren't hitting the half CFS, I don't know, the analysis on that would say that, okay, your peak flow is different, so your flood risks are higher, even though you're only raining for 15 minutes.
If you're comparing peak flows, the flow differential, that's what it's gonna show.
Right.
But like Darren was talking about, you've got two issues. You've got volume and you've got peak flow.
Well, that's why I like
Right.
just the 100 deer, because you're factoring that volume. From a 15-minute, I don't know how much volume that's going to produce, if that even is enough to full flow your system. Put your
Well,
system at full flow.
It depends on what the system, how it was designed, what's downstream,
Right.
what the impervious area is. I mean, you're capturing, when you're looking at it and you say, we can go up to a 1 acre site half paved, and that's not gonna affect the downstream people. I think that because what this is showing is the flow differential is less than a half CFS,
So,
I don't think it'll really be less than a half CFS. It's gonna be more than a CFS.
you could be right. Let me take a step back though, and just indicate that obviously what you're describing is not happening currently anyway. So right now, the discussion and the analysis that we're discussing, I know engineers are probably doing it, but it's not a requirement for any ordinance as far as I'm aware of. I know you're requiring people do it for potential risks and things like that.
But if they're triggering detention, then they're going to detention.
Right, but this would be before the trigger of detention. And I'm just trying to find that line of doing enough to give us comfort in the analysis that we're minimizing flood risks and no flood damage, to having to do way too much. And it's not really a feasible exemption at that point, because the idea is we would create these online tools to allow even non-engineers to be able to use them, and even set up a staff review to punch it in. So Dan doing a pole building on his agricultural land can go in, use the tools, request a meeting, we can help make sure that the information is accurate. And we can figure out, does he need detention or not? And so that's why I'm pushing back on that, is I don't know where that sweet spot is. If you go to critical duration, that seems too much to me in terms of having it used in an exemption method. Because currently the exemption is, you're just going to 5% in an easement or 10% in 1 acre, and you're having to demonstrate to the enforcement officer that does not result in flood damage. So those are the guidelines I'm trying to look to incorporate to provide a little bit more information so that from reviewer to reviewer, it's accurate. If we provide tools, everybody's doing it the same way. If the 100-year, 24-hour peak comparison you think is not enough of a guarantee for us to allow the exemption, then I think that's a conversation we can have. And that's why I'm drawing it back to the idea of why we're not requiring the critical duration. But, you know.
So I guess I look at it like, you know, if we're looking at giving an exemption so it's less onerous, like no detention on site, I think maybe the give is that maybe they do have to get an engineer involved and prove that they don't, you know, put the onus back on the applicant that, yes, we don't need detention, but here are the calculations to prove that it's not gonna adversely impact anybody. Because I just don't see how the two of those can go together. Like, we offer all these exemptions, you don't have to have detention, but you don't have to have any calculations to back it up.
Well, again, this does have calculations.
Right, okay, but I don't think
It's just
they're.
how intense do we want those calculations to be? I guess that's kind of what I'm hearing from Steve and some of that. I mean, I can run some critical duration, I suppose, and show what, you know, the flow rates are going to look like.
You could make a standardized Excel file too.
I have one.
Okay.
I want to use it. I don't want to put in the effort if we don't agree on, you know, these ideas and these concepts. And so, yes, that Excel file can automatically do a lot of that. I have one.
Yeah.
I just got to modify it. It's from NRCS. They already have, you enter in curve number, you enter in time of concentration, you enter in the type of storm,
Yeah.
and it'll spit that out.
It could be something you download from your website, you know, as a tool.
Yep, that's the idea, Mike, yes. So anyone can go, even you guys can go and can use it as part of your engineering services. So instead of, you know, the WDO has the chart for how much detention, right, when you're planning, based on curve number. So that curve number is popping up everywhere. But instead of going to a chart now, you'd go to our online tools, punch that stuff in, and you'll get your results, and then you do with it, you know, manipulate it as you see fit for the design and your client. So and you're already kind of doing that, right, by having to get a curve number and all of that stuff. You're already doing all of that. It's just a little bit of a different flavor. So yeah, we can look to use critical duration, and the spreadsheets can be designed to factor that in. So what this table will look like then is, you know, it will be curve numbers and then, you know, 1 hour, 2 hour, whatever. If we want to do a 15-minute, we can do a 15-minute type analysis. If that's, I personally don't think that we would need to go there, but.
It sounds like to me that the engineers would like to see that at least as backup. If you established a new threshold from the critical duration moving forward, that like detention can be exempt, or exemption from detention is based on the threshold that was calculated using critical duration.
Sure. I don't know what the results are gonna be, and I don't know that we'd ever meet this half CFS. So I don't know, you know, if you were to do that, I mean, I guess I'd have to run the analysis to show what the numbers are, but I have a fear that I don't know that we'd ever be able to come up with a value here where you can, you know, existing peak with proposed peak ever be able to meet it. And like I said, currently we're already allowing it. So this is, you know,
That's the part that I think we have to get around. The fact of the matter is, there's right now, there's no mechanism, so it's unregulated.
It's unregulated.
So we're providing a mechanism to regulate it, it's just not incorporating critical duration. So it's a go-between, I don't know if that's the proper term, but.
See, I guess I would disagree, because I think there is a mechanism, that the development shall not result in flood damage. For me, that means that they're running a critical duration and proving to me that they're not increasing any flow rates.
Yeah, but another engineer, it means something completely different too, potentially. And so this should hopefully standardize or come up with a more standardized process.
So, I mean, they are getting at it, the existing conditions peak runoff rate. So that is to your point, you can't get peak runoff rate without doing additional calculations like critical duration.
Well, that's where we could put 100-year, 10-year, or at least 100-year, 24-hour peak. But if you guys, I mean, again, if in your minds, if that's not good enough, then obviously we can look to modify that and I can show what those results are. Obviously, that would be more rigorous. I'm not denying that, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that, yeah, if we go to critical duration, then yeah, that would be kind of the ultimate analysis, if you will. I just don't know what the numbers are gonna show. And depending on what they show, again, we can sort of back on that, I guess. But no, I was not anticipating using critical. I was just anticipating using the 24-hour 100-year. So, all right, I will write that down, I guess. If no one has any other thoughts, then I'll move into the examples.
Can we talk though about the half cubic foot per second?
Yeah.
Because if we're talking about maintaining drainage patterns, to me, maintaining drainage patterns would be location and flow rate, both of them. So it would be 0. Like there should be no impact to the adjacent properties. So I understand where you're going with the 0.1 foot. You know, obviously we use that in our analysis when we send it to like IDNR or, you know, for culvert analysis. But why I would say it should be 0 if there should be no impact and no change to any drainage patterns.
But then how
For
do
the
you,
exemption?
but how do you allow an increase without detention? Because you're never gonna be able to achieve 0 unless you add impervious here and add a rain garden over there.
Well, I mean.
So I think that's, you know, the idea behind the exemption is, and I guess that's the question. You know, personally, 1/10 of an increase, 1 inch or less than 1, what is it, about 1 inch, I don't even know. But, you know, I would think that would be acceptable in my mind.
So I think it depends on the scenario, like, you know, when you're comparing sheet flow, you know, spread out over a large area and you're comparing that CFS to now putting it into a concentrated pipe that might be directed towards somebody's property and they are now seeing, you know, some impacts, like our erosion, something like that, that would be considered an impact. You know what I mean? So if we're just comparing increase of runoff rate,
right,
you know, you can manipulate that, you know, it looks different in existing versus proposed.
But I think as the reviewer, then you would say, hey, you gotta run a model of sheet flow and you gotta run a model of pipe, right? You're gonna get 2 different results. You guys are, obviously, it's hard for me to give you guys enough modeling and examples. So that's why this was created, was to obviously show you what it is and the use of that. Now, yeah, if you have those type of scenarios that, you know, we can look at those and show what the numbers show. That was kind of the one part where I can't anticipate, you know, everything that you guys would come up with, but you're not, you know, by obtaining the existing peak and the proposed peak, obviously that's one analysis and that's another analysis. I haven't done that yet for you guys, right? I haven't really put effort into showing that. This is just showing basic understanding that the concepts work, and then getting into some of the details though. Should we be analyzing critical peak as opposed to just 100-year? I think that's a good question.
So, the 100-year numbers right now, up until the last 2 years, we've made several comments in the ag community that we see that once a year now. So if that development's already been brought up to that 100-year number, it's there. You don't need to go into all this 15-minute downpour stuff. Am I right or am I wrong?
Well, I think what the scenario would be is if you take your ag land, right, and you're looking at it from an existing conditions, that water is gonna take longer to get from point A to point B as opposed to you paving that, right? It's gonna be quicker to get from point A to point B in that scenario. So that's where the time of concentration comes in. I was not trying to demonstrate what those impacts would be. I think because in my mind we can understand that you'll get faster flow from the impervious areas as opposed to pervious areas. So the likelihood of meeting the half CFS and maintaining existing drainage areas is unlikely, so then you're having to go to detention. So that was one reason why I didn't toggle time of concentration on these, scenarios here. Yes.
There's a reason for the question. It sounds like it's loaded, and it is. If you had to take...
Great. Can't wait.
If you had to take a year's worth of your office's activities regarding this, how many of these exemptions, what percentage number, would you say 3% would actually be involved with this, or, 100 permits?
I don't know.
Okay.
Maybe that's the answer.
If it's a low number, okay, and I'm looking at all of this, and I've been watching this, and I'm saying, it can't be a huge number.
Here's what I can give you most of the situations.
No, I understand, but,
Where that
okay,
happens,
let's say it's 100, just for my argument. Maybe it's 1,000, I don't know.
Okay.
Would it be an option, and this is gonna sound stupid, if I want a passport, I go to the post office and I make an appointment, I step in, they take my photo, I finish the form, I submit. Would it be an option to say, okay, we will set up appointments every Tuesday from noon to 4.
Yeah.
Set a 15-minute appointment, come in, do this. Now, you have the option, if they don't like the results they get from you, they can go to an outside source. And they can take the data you give them, go to an outside source and say, look, I disagree. I don't think I should need any detention. And they could come back. But would that be easier? And so somebody just gets on the docket, sits at your guys' counter, they take 15 minutes with you guys, your program, go, yep, no, you do, you don't. And now someone moves forward, as opposed to, no offense, I think your idea is great. And I think, yes, there are exceptions, but the problem is, trying to put that into words so that not only the people sitting in this room, but anybody on the outside, any engineer on the outside, picks up the document, reads it, go, got it, clear as water, let's go.
That's
just a thought.
You literally summarized the plan we were trying to explain here. I don't know.
But
so
I got it that anybody here should
so
be
let me let me get into an example for you guys, okay? Because here's how it would work. So take this site here, 8.23 acres. You go on our website, okay? You punch in you're saying, okay, I'm gonna develop the whole thing. So if you're gonna develop the whole thing, you take the 8.23 acres. You punch in a curve number. I chose here, or they chose, this is coming from data from the applicant, they did 78. We would have a curve number table. You would choose that. With this, what I'm hoping GIS can produce from the contours is a flow path, much like these people did here. Okay, here's your flow path. And based on the contours, you just take velocity, which we can have programmed for one number for grass, one number for paved, which is what TR55 does. You use those charts. You know the flow path, you know the length, you know the slope. It's gonna give you a time of concentration. So now you have the time of concentration, right? So you have pretty much everything then to get a flow rate, an existing flow rate. Sorry, this is proposed. An existing flow rate based on different time of concentrations. You run the same exercise for your proposed and you compare the two, and if the proposed is less than a half CFS, then you are exempt from detention. If it's not, you have to go through the detention requirement. That's kind of what you're asking, is it not?
It is, but, okay, I agree, it is. And from a guy who's way too verbose, I'll take that hit right off the bat and I'll give it to myself. The explanation that's trying to be generated in words or examples or summarization is so complex for such, what sounds like such a simple thing. And so it was just a suggestion. It was just a suggestion, as I said. If there's 100 of these in a year, then why not just have the person, come to the counter, stand there for 10 minutes or 15 minutes, and you go, here's your answer. If you accept it, fine, this is it. If not, you can go to an outside source and try to come up with something else. And it just a thought, that's all it is.
And I hope you appreciate that all the questions I get, that's why I need a lot of different exhibits and a lot of calculations, so I can put all of that at ease. So it does get complicated, yes.
I thoroughly appreciate it.
And I've tried to simplify it with some of this, but that's essentially
It's
how
not
this
uncomplicated because it's currently unregulated.
It's not regulated, correct.
So everything you're providing is better than what you already have. Anything.
And the critical duration analysis aside, that's how this is meant to work. That's the analysis. We would give you the tools, you would go and you would be looking at comparing existing versus proposed. And ultimately, if you're lowering, proposed flows, I think everybody here can agree, you're making it better, right? You're minimizing the flood risk and minimizing the flood damage. I'm not looking to make it zero, that's impossible. Right, so as policy, you have to have some wiggle room in there, and that's what that's trying to achieve. But that's how that first section is meant to be set up, is to do that analysis. And like I said, the wording might need a touch up, and the explanations might need a touch up, and all of that might need a touch up. And obviously, once we roll out the tool and everything, it might make sense, and maybe referencing that and having a tutorial, all of this is gonna help. But yeah, that's how simple it is, really, that we wanna make it, is to be able to get the data, plug it in, get a comparison, and what we're trying to decide right now is what type of flow rate increase do we feel would meet the definition of minimal flood risk, minimal flood damage. That's why I went to the 10th, because that's what's acceptable in a lot of flood plain, flood hazard type conditions. You don't increase the flood heights. DOT, you guys replace bridges, you can't increase the flood height by more than a 1/10.
Right.
State uses that too. Certainly not, we can go to zero. I just don't know of any scenarios.
Please don't.
without-
State property is zero.
Clean the ditch.
State property is zero. So, but we can have that for maybe critical infrastructure, that's already in there. Some of that language is already in there for like a hospital or an emergency area or something like that, sure. We can generate the language to give the enforcement officer that capability. But to Brian's point, this isn't being done currently. And I just want to try to strike that balance of how much we need and what are those parameters, what are those numbers that we would feel comfortable with. So if we can agree that a 1/10 of an increase is acceptable, well then a half CFS basically is the flow rate, right? That in worst case scenarios, in your most worst ditch lines, in your smallest pipes, And I don't know, you asked me for percentage, what would be the percentage of infrastructure that we see that on? 5%, 10%?
I'd say probably somewhere around 5.
5%.
Just a guess, just a
So
guess.
So 95% is probably gonna be bigger pipes where we know is gonna be able to pass even more at a lower rate. Which is kind of what I figured, that's why I went with the half CFS. We can touch that up. So then one of the only remaining concerns is what is that peak flow rate comparison between the existing and proposed? Are we gonna require critical duration, or are we gonna just sit with the 100-year, 24-hour? I would, instead of going to critical duration, I would say that we can analyze a smaller rain event potentially, because then we would have more assurance, so we can do like a 50-year or a 10-year as opposed to a 100-year comparison. I don't know, like again.
Your 100 years, your worst case scenario.
Well, that's why I chose it, Dan, but I'm just spitballing here because I don't know that going to critical duration, how much more, it's like the analogy of I don't know if you guys are familiar with water treatment, but you go to 99.99% treatment. To get that next 0.9, you're going off the charts. And I don't know if getting that next point, like that's where I'm trying to gauge from you guys with just using 100-year, 24-hour, what's our confidence level? 90, 99, 95? If we go to critical duration, is it increasing by that much more? Is kind of where I'm at. You know, trying to figure out that sweet spot.
And I think in my opinion, I think the confidence level, there is a significant difference in confidence level between just looking at the 100-year, 24-hour and looking at a critical duration.
Okay. So let's do this. I will run some critical duration, but it sounds like at least the process so far for the exemptions makes sense. We can take a look at the critical durations and we can refine what we want. Do we like the half CFS? We can take a look at some of that and vary those then once those numbers come back.
Yeah, and I guess from the situation of an ag property, we can't do something with ag zoning or something.
You want me to give you some specifics?
Help exempt ag.
Take us out of the stormwater ordinance.
Right, I mean, if that's the concern, why don't we?
Kind of what I was thinking, if there's another trigger that could be used, then require the additional analysis that would be required.
Yeah.
And I don't know that a blanket exemption for specific land use is necessarily the best way to do it, but if there's another trigger, if certain conditions exist, then the critical duration analysis needs to be done. As a non-model.
You could make it the same way you could say whether it's an incorporated entity or a the county itself, because I'm getting the sense these are coming through the county, not as much through the communities themselves. I mean, there's a couple different ways you could layer it. I don't know if that's what you want to do, but I'm just saying a lot of this goes away if you take out, I think, the incorporated entities.
Well, I think I want to just make it an even playing field.
I get that.
So I don't, but I struggle to see why you would have more confidence not doing critical duration on a farm field as opposed to any other development. Why would you exempt critical duration for, and I'm not trying to, pick on ag, I just feel that if you're able to show it on ag, you can show it on other properties if it works with the same confidence. So if you don't have that confidence without the critical duration, I don't see how you can have that confidence without the critical duration on ag.
I mean, I can pretty much tell by inspection on ag if there's gonna be a problem. But on these other ones, I mean, the critical duration, I think the main issue is we eliminated under 1I that it's 10% of the contiguous property. So you can have essentially 1 acre of new impervious created for any size parcel, even a 1 acre parcel, if you don't exceed the half CFS. And your analysis without critical duration was showing you could have 100% 1 acre parcel paved, and there wouldn't be any runoff control.
Yeah,
And that's not right. You could even have, half of a 2 acre parcel paved. It's gonna have a lot more runoff than a half CFS.
Well, I would agree with that. That's a comment I said a little bit differently earlier. It doesn't seem to match, what we normally see because of the change in concentration.
No, again, I didn't run those scenarios, and I can run that to show what the numbers will reflect. If you guys want, yes, the 10% can get added in. It just felt like the main controller would be if we come up with a flow rate increase, then that flow rate increase would be the confidence that you're, actively minimizing that flood risk.
Yeah,
I guess that's.
I'm not opposed so much to the flow rate increase of a half CFS if the actual differential is done, based on critical duration storm events and engineering standards. I mean, because then you're gonna have the result. The result is the result, and based on best available data, you're gonna have to use the critical duration, you're gonna have to vary your time of concentration, you're gonna have to vary your curve number depending on what you're adding.
You're gonna vary curve number and time of concentration no matter what. I cannot stress that enough for you guys. I think the only thing that's different here that I did not include is the critical duration analysis. And I don't disagree with you guys, that would give somebody a lot more confidence than it would normally. And it sounds like that's probably what we want to do, is to incorporate that. And that's not going to be difficult in terms of incorporating it into the analysis with a spreadsheet, because I can have 15-minute whatever, and the spreadsheet can highlight your two peaks between existing and proposed, and then you can compare the two. So it doesn't really change anything. Clarification, I just want to make sure and I never had a problem with doing it. Again, it just went back to, if that's the confidence level that we need, then that's the confidence level that we need. So that's all I wanted to have a discussion on. So that's what I was trying to find out from the group. Sounds like that's the confidence level that's needed.
Yeah, I guess my concern is a 1.5 acre vacant parcel in a municipality that gets 1 acre of paved or whatever it gets. And they come back with this analysis and say, we don't need any detention. And we're using a 100-year, 24-hour storm event, which has no basis in reality for that site. That's what I'm concerned with. I'm not concerned with like a pole barn out in the field and using, whatever you use. But I'm concerned with, in a municipality, a vacant parcel that's grass, all of a sudden somebody paves the whole thing.
Right.
What's the difference between a critical duration storm event and a 100-year flood? What am I missing here? So the 100-year event is typically tied to 24 hours. So what Steve is saying is, you don't run 24 hours, you run 1 hour or 2 hour, you run shorter duration, which is gonna produce.
You have that table, right?
Just as much rain at a shorter time.
So for the way that, why don't you pull up that rainfall
Technically, it's
table?
1 through the 120, right, or 240?
Yeah, up through 240.
I never required one run.
So, I mean, it depends on how much storage you have. That's what generates the time length and the duration. If there's no storage, the critical duration is gonna be the shortest. If you have a basin it's gonna be the 24-hour.
I guess that's where I'm going,
So here-
If you're doing that, I don't understand why you need the critical.
Because so for example, in a 100-year, you're getting, Joe, you're getting, I'll just go to 1 hour here, you're getting 4 inches in 1 hour as opposed to 8 inches spread over 24 hours. You're getting less rainfall increment in each 1 hour segment.
Well, then goes to 5
You can-
minutes.
Yeah,
And
go to
then
the,
go to a 5 minute, you're getting more rain in that time step. So if you wanna look at it of 1 hour time steps, for the critical duration, you're taking into account that that is a really high intensity storm. It only rains for 1 hour, but it produces 3.5 inches in that 1 hour, as opposed to a 24-hour, which produces 8.5 inches. And so those are gonna operate much differently, and the impacts are gonna be felt differently.
So if you're gonna base this on a critical event, you're building bigger detention ponds.
No, this is for whether or not you would need detention.
just for comparing existing and proposed conditions.
And then once you say you need detention, then you size your pond based on the 24-hour.
Right. So like if your existing conditions is 3.53, you're using the same rainfall number in your proposed condition. So that's where I'll run the numbers, but I have, when you're looking at those numbers, because you're using the same rainfall, I don't know what the differences are gonna be. We might find that it's perfectly fine, and that if running the critical duration might make sense, and we'll have to, how we set up our tools would capture that, so it doesn't add additional work, essentially.
But if you drop down to, for example, the 5 minute is 12 inches of rain plus.
You mean the 240 hour?
No, the 100-year,
100-year, 5 minute,
Yeah.
1 inch?
well, you multiply by 12.
Oh, so you're turning into an intensity, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, I mean, that's what we're comparing with the 4 inches as an intensity, that's the 1 hour. So when you go from 12 to 4, you can see there's a big differential just by varying that time of concentration. I mean, you're typically, your critical duration is gonna be about 3 times your TC.
Right.
So if you've got a 15-minute TC, that could be an hour. And if you have a 5-minute TC, that could be 15 minutes. So right there, you're going from 4 to like 9.2 or something.
So let me ask you this
Yeah.
before we go there,
Okay,
just for my own sanity break here.
sure.
The EO still would have the ability to trump this calculation, right?
Oh, that's the
So-
language I haven't added yet. And
So,
I do wanna stress.
Regardless, you can choose to not accept this analysis, Steve. And you could require a critical duration analysis.
But I think if it's not in the ordinance,
Well, none of this is in the ordinance right now.
No, well, there is stuff in the ordinance. We're deleting out the 10% rule, which would allow a
Which we
1
can-
acre site
we can add
doesn't
that.
have to have, that would only allow it to have 1/10 of an acre of imperviousness added, or up to a 1/2 acre of impervious.
Right, but I guess what I'm trying to get to is that regardless of what he puts in the ordinance now, this is a parachute for some people, may not fit all the site, you still have the decision to say nope, nope, and nope.
Not illegal, you don't have legal backing to do
Right.
that. Because, based on the Dillon rule, you can only regulate or request what's written in an ordinance. You can't just start making up stuff. So if you got.
Well, I mean, the ordinance would say that the EO has discretion to do that, would it not?
Well,
We can
you
add,
can't,
yeah.
you probably won't get a legal challenge, but if you did, you'd lose it. Because you just can't make up stuff. But I've gone to court on this issue a lot. Not a lot,
So,
but enough.
A little stuff.
All right, we got an inside guy. No, I think what I'll do is I'll run the analysis, okay, and You're right, Steve. I think what the idea behind this is trying to prevent those scenarios by comparing those. And so the idea is that somebody that tries to go from a 1 acre site with a curve number, and again, that's why this is limited, but the idea would be that they go from a curve number of whatever, 60 something to a curve number of 98, that their flow difference would exceed a certain parameter and say you're not exempt. That is one of the goals here, because on ag sites, you're more than likely gonna be okay, like you mentioned. So yes, that is what this is designed to do, and it just needs to be fine-tuned then, based on the discussion. It doesn't sound like anybody has an objection at this point to the procedure and process. It's just fine-tuning some of the language, which I anticipated, some of the details, allowing extra provisions for the EO to make some overriding factors based on historical downstream flooding issues, et cetera, which I acknowledge all of that. But it's, from my understanding, it's just getting into those details. Does that sound about right?
Well, so I guess to Steve's point is the 10% contiguous, that seemed to make it apply to farm fields or large parcels, right? I think that's where the heartburn is that by taking that out, we are now letting small parcels go in. So can we put something like that back in to make this truly applicable to larger parcels?
Yeah, we can. It just in my mind, it was like, why do that if you feel comfortable? Because you're gonna have the catch-all of the half CFS. So if you're comfortable with the analysis and you have the catch-all, why do I care? Why not just have 1 acre or 10% and let the half CFS and the analysis straighten it all out and have the tools there?
And how many of your in-city lots are greater than half an acre?
Very little, and
You
how
get the half acre requirement that
Right,
they can almost do a whole half acre of impervious.
but I'm thinking of say they lob off part of a cornfield, right? And they take that 1 acre that's, amongst all this other, and then they pave it all out, right? Like, it's not just infill and small little lots. I mean, there's a lot of area, but that would impact the surrounding area, right? Like to Steve's point, if they take that 1 acre and pretty much pave the whole thing, now they're seeing all these adverse impacts, even though they don't increase the 0.5.
Well, but would they, if the flow rate is not increased by more than a half CFS based on intent and everything?
Right, you gotta comply with that.
I guess that's where I'm struggling with some of you. You seem to be, going back and forth. I don't know what your definition of, no flood damage or minimal risk is. So that's why I'm struggling to find out, is it, what is it? Because in my mind, we have to put something down here. We have to put some parameters to give some consistency, because one of the criteria, is I'm sure you guys are aware of, is that I get, Stoyan, you're great, what happens when the next guy comes in, and what happens to the next guy? And then what if I have a certified community that's operating under certain standards than the county is? I don't know how to control that unless we come up with some parameters. We have to do that. So unless you guys have some specific ideas on what minimal flood risk and safety is, because to me, the 10th seems to work, and relaying that back to a flow rate and looking at infrastructure, I don't know. Analyzing the flow rates between existing and proposed seems to make sense. So if that makes sense to us, then I think that's how we should move forward again and figure out then what we want these targets to be and whether or not we want to incorporate critical duration, which I'm open for. That's part of this, was not to demonstrate like, hey, we're good with it. It's just to show some of the numbers, relay it in a way so you guys can see what that looks like. So it brings up examples like Steve mentioned, which is great. I do not want to have a existing wooded area that's 1 acre be lopped off, go to fully impervious impervious area and say that there's minimal risks there.
Wait, you wanna remove the Mr. T clause? That's not fair at all. I don't know where you come from.
And say that there's minimal risks there. I want it to be backed up by saying that you're not changing flow patterns and that there's some kind of flow rate comparison to get us there. I think that's what makes sense, and I think that can be applied universally to any development if they can meet those conditions. And I would think that example, you're not meeting that condition, you're gonna be over, you need to provide detention.
The other comment I would say is your definition of flood damage only talks about a rise in flood heights on a building. So it doesn't mention, like, if somebody's farm field gets flooded out, you know, or an area of property that, you know, wasn't subject to flooding, and how is it impacted?
Well, yeah, I mean,
Do you wanna,
I don't
do you
know.
wanna review that with this group to look at that definition?
Absolutely. I guess that was part of my question, right? What do you guys consider flood damage?
Yeah.
You know, what would be reasonable? And that's why I just went with the generic tenth of an increase. Now, I don't know what that would look like over a large depressional area, right? I haven't, again, and the whole number of different scenarios and catch-alls that we can try, but at some point, are you capturing 2%, or are you capturing 95% of the current conditions? Because if we have a policy that gets us to 95%, we're never gonna be able to get to that other 5%. It's gonna be impossible.
But do you have the tenth of a foot in here anywhere?
No, that's
Okay.
my, that's my new,
Okay.
let me get to,
Well, doesn't the tenth of a foot help justify the 0.5?
well, that's what I was, yes, that's
Because
what
I think
was
that's the critical decision there, is making sure that the criteria are defensible in a court of law.
So, yeah, here's the definition of flood damage: a measurable rise in flood heights at a building currently subject to flooding, or flooding of a building not currently subject to flooding. So you're right, Mike, that's why I think going to the tenth of increase
Gotcha.
would more broadly be a better indicator as to using some kind of building or structure, because yes, property damage, septic systems,
Right.
Those are crops, absolutely. So that's why the idea of this correlating into a tenth of an acre in a lot of your infrastructure, that's the leap that I'm making. So yes, this definition would have to get revised or be eliminated altogether. I don't know where else it's referenced. I can run that query to see what else would be affected. And I would love to go with the terminology of minimal flood risks. Because I don't know how to guarantee
I need to
no.
find minimal.
The tenth of an increase. Because I don't know how you defined no flood damage at all. And it doesn't even specify, like, what if you get a 500-year event? So that, and that's the other thing, is like with these scenarios, sure, we can run critical duration until you find another opportunity for some different analysis to show. So it's just trying to fine tune that level of confidence. And I think that if we can make these connections, and we can throw 10%, I can combine these, 1 acre or up to 10%. I can combine these. That's the reason why I removed them, was I felt like, okay, if we have this concepts of the half CFS to the 10th, so on and so forth, you're comparing the peaks, then, right, we get there.
I would like to throw one more scenario out. We're talking about changing hydrology to different land uses, agricultural, residential. It is also important to think about the ecological. So when I encounter an area of dead trees, the number one cause of the tree death is changes in hydrology. So, you know, if you have an area of oaks that have died, more than likely the hydrology has increased. If you have wet trees that are dead, you know, you starve the hydrology. So I just at least want to put it out there in people's minds that minor changes in hydrology can have major impacts on different types of ecological communities. And tree communities are one of the most susceptible to hydrologic changes. I don't know that we need to necessarily address anything, but I at least wanted to get that in people's minds when we're talking about changes in hydrology impacting adjacent land uses.
I think more on that is the oak wilt that's getting them. I mean, we've got 6 oak trees that are dead and there's been no hydrological.
You're absolutely right. I'm not discounting oak wilt, I mean, over 30 years of seeing this, the hydrologic changes are one of the main contributors to tree mortality.
Absolutely.
All right. I'd like to try to incorporate some of these examples for you guys. I just am always mindful of everyone's time. I understand, you know, the folks I have in front of me and, you know, the dollar sign associated with the hours and everything. So if someone needs to go, please feel free, and I'd love to keep spending time on this. So, but I think that what I'll do is I'll run existing conditions just to show what that looks like on the scenarios that I have, because I have them set up. And then we can revisit some of those concepts, the half CFS, the existing conditions. But for what it sounds like, I don't have pushback on that. I think it's just that comparison. Like Steve, for you, if we go to existing conditions, in general, the way that we've been talking about this, acceptable in your mind in terms of analysis and whether or not it's triggering detention or not?
Yeah, that we're gonna be maintaining existing.
Just the idea of you're analyzing existing, you're analyzing proposed, you're running the critical duration, and you're using that to check the differences in the peak flow rates. And as long as, you know, whether it's a half CFS or 1 CFS or 0.25 CFS, that would give us, that would get us to the idea of minimizing that flood risk, that flood damage.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Jody, you're, yes? No?
I'm along for the ride. I will hear you out.
Okay. Well, then.
Let's do your example. You've been itching to like.
No, I just, you know, you guys have asked me for a lot of scenarios, so this is where we can get into a lot of that. And so, okay. You guys have seen this one before, but essentially, you know, here's how it would work. You analyze your existing conditions. So this would be one where, you know, you're triggering detention essentially, or you're going through the process to show that you're not triggering detention or that you need detention, et cetera. So both of what we're talking about would work, but you're analyzing. So I've got 3 different tributary areas here. For the sake of this particular proposal, they're impacting the whole thing. So what you're looking at is analyzing the existing flow rates of each one. So I just have them listed here. They used a curve number of 78. Here's your time of concentrations. This is 100-year, 24 hours, so this is not criticals. So this is meant to show you're triggering detention, and now you're operating for the allowable reduce rates. I did not run 2-year analyses, by the way, just for simplicity. So you would then go and say, okay, what are your proposed conditions? So here's what they're modifying it. I apologize, this should say area 3 to match the area 3 up here. So I apologize about the typo there. But area 1, here's the numbers that they used. So they're getting a proposed flow rate of 6.97. So if we go back and compare that to the existing 4.1, we can see that it's way over the half, so there would be triggering detention. So that's how that would work. If we had the critical duration, it would be a critical duration comparison. So again, we can confirm they're triggering detention. So That's their proposed flows currently. Again, area 3, this is area 3 here. So same idea, analyze existing, analyze proposed, right? Then you add your reductions. Now, I didn't factor in any clearing or anything like that because I didn't really have any, just for simplicity. So for area 1, they're proposing 5.45 acres of new impervious. So we applied the reduction, so their allowable release rate becomes 4.6, their allowable, they need a reduction of 4.63, I apologize. So then you apply the reduction on area 3, they need a reduction of 0.09 CFS. So you apply those reductions to the existing flows. I have a summary here. So area 1, 3.03 in the existing, 4.63 reduction required, we get a negative. So part of the hierarchy was maintaining existing drainage patterns. Here they're not, because area 2 is now flowing into area 1. So that would be kind of their first hierarchy method. Their second would be trying to use infiltration. It's not feasible. Their allowable is the existing 2-year peak, which would be the 100-year, which equals 0.80 CFS.
Why, if it's 100-year, why did you say 2-year?
Because this is a scenario where their reduction far exceeds. So I know you guys were looking at maybe going back to what we were using. I'm just looking to go to a condition that we know makes it better and we have confidence in.
Okay.
So it would just be, hey, your allowable release rate is your existing 2-year, 100-year, 2-year. So, sorry, this probably shouldn't say peak, because peak would imply critical duration. So that's what the release rate. So area 3, we would do the same exercise. Your existing conditions flow rate is 0.73. The reduction required is 0.09. So your allowable is 0.62. Your proposed flow is 0.55, so it meets requirements. So in area 1, you don't meet requirements. In area 2, you do, because you've essentially decreased the amount of tributary area, and it's minimal with the setbacks. It's mostly right of way, so there's minimal impervious there. As you can see, 0.11. So you would have to provide detention for area 1. So here's, again, the table. Existing flow with the curve numbers, the flow reduction required based on your proposed, your allowable release rate becomes negative, which triggers that hierarchy. Try to maintain your drainage pattern so you're not sending too much one way. Try to do infiltration, or you're using the existing 2-year, 100-year flow. For comparison, if you were to use current requirements at the 0.15, your 1.23 is what you would be allowed to release. That's how, if you implement everything, that's how it would work. Obviously, curve numbers and things like that, I pulled their information. We would be developing those, but that's what that shows. So if I go to the next one for solar, yeah, 3 tributary areas here, got them all listed, right? Same idea, run your existing, here's the curve numbers and the time and concentrations that they used. You figure out your proposed impervious in each one, you multiply your reductions. And again, I simplified, I didn't look at any clearing or anything like that. And these are the reductions. So you take those reductions, subtract them from your existing, you get your allowable release rates. Then you run your proposed conditions and you check to see if you meet those. So summary table, you can see here a little bit easier. Here's your allowable after you reduce. Here's the proposed. The difference being with the solar farms, you're adding the natives, so it's reducing the curve numbers. Something that you guys brought up. You can see that in some cases, now, I didn't get too specific, but in a lot of cases, their time of concentrations went up, right? So you get those reductions. So this one is a better example to show you guys those differences and how they work. If they were to, and these are very minor impervious increases, if they were to crank those up, right, those impervious numbers up, those curve numbers would come up, they wouldn't be able to meet those release rates potentially. So if it wasn't a solar site. And the one thing I wanted to show is, again, current conditions, here's what your release rate would be, but here's what the contours show. So this would be a scenario in my mind as a designer where you've got Franklinville Creek down here, I think it is. You're probably doing, if this was not a solar farm and you're doing some kind of commercial, you're probably aiming at one detention basin down here, right? So now you're into the scenario where you're, all those other tributary areas, no, it's really just the one up here that doesn't flow, that now you're combining into this. Now it all goes to the creek, but imagine the creek wasn't there. You know, I can't find the perfect example for everything, but it just demonstrates, you know, the ideas that we've been talking about in the analysis behind it. So if you crank up your impervious areas here, these reductions would obviously be much higher. Your allowable flow rates would increase. You're going to be stuck with having to provide detention. But this is a scenario where, if you guys see, I've got 3 acres of impervious. So under current conditions, they trigger detention. The intent is, for solar farms, you don't want infrastructure because they can go back to ag. And you have 3 different tributary areas where you are going to have potentially a lot of undetained, which is going to impact your, right? So,
do they do a lot of grading on solar farm sites?
not generally, no.
Okay, so they just build them based on the contours?
They might grade a little bit, Mike, but in general, it's not going to be like you're at 2% and now you're at 25% where that flow rate is going to increase due to the slope.
Okay.
That you see very little of that. And also in their proposed curve numbers, I mean, they're proposing natives. I mean, they were very conservative, as you guys can see. I don't even agree with their use, but I was like, heck, if you're that conservative and it works, that's fine. I'm not going to make you go. And they use the full TR55 method, which this is the first time I've ever seen anyone use that for flows, which is quite interesting. So it produced much higher flow values for them. I did not do that. I ran this into, you can see here I have my solar farm. I ran this in the HydroCAD SCS method.
Just a quick question.
Yes.
On what they chose to do there to get to those numbers. So we've got one proposed in the neighborhood that wants to put in an enormous amount of gravel roads for some reason. So this would detour them from doing that?
This would, well, it wouldn't necessarily say, hey, don't put those in. And I don't know if some of that's being triggered through fire districts.
No, this is the solar farm itself.
But I'm just saying some of it is triggered through fire districts. But what this would essentially do is prompt them to make sure that they're installing natives and offsetting, giving them an ability to offset some of those impervious areas without the need of putting in storm sewer and a detention basin, which would then make that land basically unusable in the future, right? It's once you do that, you're stuck with that sole purpose. And this is, going through this exercise, I think though, it works for solar farms, it could work for anyone else. for the ag folks too, that want to take measures other than detention basin and infrastructure on the property to help achieve, minimizing floods, I'll use that term. So they use some higher curve numbers here. I think they probably could have gone with much lower, obviously. But it's just showing that they would be fine under the current conditions. I would have to make them do detention. Now for these guys specifically, I did not consider the native areas as disturbed to kind of get it through. Right or wrong, you can fight me on it, but.
So question with regard to your solar farm, and I'm looking at the curve numbers existing.
Yeah.
Most of these are going in cornfield areas, it seems like, soybean fields.
Right.
Those numbers are pretty low. Or actually,
These are high.
I was looking at the second column, never mind.
Yes. Well,
they're about right.
If I show you, they did the whole 9 yards. They broke it up into percentages, they took the full soils and did percentages and everything, and A and B, and went with, if it was A and B, went with the B.
So I looked at the wrong column.
Yeah, so I think, for what's there, and not all of it is being farmed, if you look at the aerials, these are probably a little bit high too. Again, I just took real life information, I wasn't trying to reinvent the wheel. When we develop our own curve numbers, I'd like to come back and give you guys these scenarios and say, okay, here's if we apply our curve numbers and everything, here's how things would look.
So, my last question about the solar farms. You guys are inspecting these when they're done, and there's good grass growth going on underneath these panels?
Not necessarily grass growth if they're proposing natives. What ends up happening is if the vegetation's coming through, that pushes them into their maintenance period, their performance standard period. So it's yes, they're getting things to grow, now they need to manage it. And we will be looking to add into the SMO that to get consideration for pervious area underneath the panels, we need to use natives. We'd be looking to make that connection, because then we can apply the county's performance standards throughout, which is an issue that we've had, because I'm sure some of you are aware, brought up, if you don't maintain them, they don't come up how you need them to come up.
Right. The establishment period is absolutely critical, and then maintaining it over time. It's not a one and done type of a thing. Right. So the performance standards we put together are pretty rigorous, and we will be updating those. We've met and come up with a game plan to have a pretty rigorous but attainable set of standards.
They put up a letter of credit kind of thing, or?
No, it would be part of their maintenance plan, right, as part of these updates. And we'd be doing some site prep requirements on top of that. We'd be requiring some site prep as part of that. It's gonna be coming, but one thing at a time here, obviously.
Yeah, the letter of credit, we did look into that, and I don't know all the specifics, but it wasn't a viable option.
Yeah, we tried doing a similar project.
Yes.
Oh, go back up, Stoyan. What
Yes.
was the allowable release rate if we were to use current code?
12.4. And I'm assuming here that probably, given you can see the elevation fall, that'd be one detention basin down towards the river area.
And what did you end up at in that scenario?
Here,
Yeah.
here's what the allowable would look like from each one.
I guess high level, just discussion point. In the past, whenever we've had to go and explain to the public why detention is required, because when neighbors come to meetings, their first thing is always, yes, your release rate is lower, but you're putting all this new stormwater volume on us, you're generating all this new volume. So the discussion has always been, yes, there's new volume, but we're releasing it at such a slow rate, it'll minimize the impact. So with something like this, there will be less volume and we'll be releasing it at a higher rate.
So again, it goes back to the idea of how much we like curve number, right? Because what this is saying is that actually in your existing conditions versus proposed, you're making it better through the curve number idea, right? Because the existing is bare, dilapidated areas, whatever it is, and then the proposed, you're incorporating natives and vegetating it. So you're getting reduction in both.
Back to the solar farms, are you gonna make those, standards, they have to be met by the following owners, because these solar farms are changing hands left and right.
Yeah, it's perpetuity. It's in perpetuity. Bonds, the bond, the decommissioning bonds, all of that is in perpetuity. Yeah.
Good point, and that is something that we've had lots of discussions, and, you know, there are a couple companies that at least claim that they're gonna be the single owner throughout the entire life cycle, but we've certainly seen many sites where the ownership changes hands very rapidly. And so, yeah, you need to make sure that this is applied to the site and not to the property owner, or the site owner.
Jody, back to your comment, I mean, obviously.
Yeah, actually, I don't think, I'm not getting it, because like a 23 CFS, say, release rate, right? That's gonna be a big pipe, like a 15 to 12 inch, like whatever it ends up being, as opposed to an actual small orifice restrictor.
In this condition, they're not putting any infrastructure, their infrastructure.
Okay, so this is assuming no detention?
No, in this particular example, we assume, well, yes, that would be one way to look at it, but the detention, I ran through as if detention is being required, and you're applying these reductions, and they're meeting those, so actually their stormwater management is not a detention basin or a pipe, it's their native vegetation. So if, you know, again, I'll go back, if we don't subscribe to the idea that native vegetations provide flow reduction, volume reduction, and all of that through the use of a curve number, then basically all of our calculations that we've ever done, I mean, this HydroCAD doesn't make sense anymore.
No, it's consistent with what Lake County does. They may not codify it that way, but they have an allowance for a curve number reduction.
So, you know, that's the idea, and that's the explanation, is that, yes, they're adding impervious, it's a small amount, and the idea is that you're offsetting it with green infrastructure, in this case natives. But then, yeah, well, how are you guaranteeing that it's not gonna be all weeds and all of that? That's gonna be some of the next steps in discussions, and like a curve number discussion specifically for agricultural. There's so many variables right now, you have like, I don't know, over 30 different curve numbers you can choose from. The discussion on staff, and I mean, we have ag folks here has been just one agricultural curve number. Because if you say you're gonna get credits for soybeans one year, if the market's driving no soybeans that year, Bruce isn't gonna plant soybeans, pretty much guarantee it. So trying to minimize those type of exposures and just say that existing conditions for agricultural is curve number 75 is how we would battle that, right? And then if you're doing natives, what's the benefit of those? Is it a curve number of 50, 45? Those are still some of the discussions we have to discuss. By the way, if you look at this 0.85 reduction, if you look at the amount of rainfall in inches you would get from a curve number of 98, a 0.85 reduction per CFS operates at a curve number of around 40. So there's straight correlation to the reduction number. It's not arbitrary as well. I didn't pluck it out of thin air.
Well, I think we went over a lot of research on natives, and it was clear that they do reduce flow.
So to your point, why are they not requiring to put in detention? That's why. They're lowering their curve number through the use of the natives. And that's offsetting the impact from the impervious areas. So and that's how it all connects back to the exemptions, why I'm going to curve numbers, why I'm going to drainage patterns. You know, do we want to use critical duration? Sure, we can run those numbers.
It's like beating a dead horse deader.
So, But this is, this is what it would generate. And then obviously what this would say is if you didn't have a solar farm and you're doing more commercial or residential, you're cranking up those impervious numbers, you're not gonna be able to meet those reductions anymore, you're triggering detention. And now you're having to do a detention basin. But as you saw, you asked me what the existing is. The 0.15 per tributary area tends to be conservative unless you really crank up that impervious number. So this method does have a gauge to not being overly restrictive on sites, but capturing sites where it does need to be overly restrictive. So it does have that range. Currently, we don't have that. Real quick, you guys have seen this one, I just, for the sake of it, the numbers are here. So when we crank those numbers, you can see you start to get into negatives or zero numbers when you do that. So you're going to infiltration, maintaining existing drainage patterns if you can, or you're going to the existing 2-year, 100-year as your allowable release. So if we can sit there and say, well, would like if someone was like, all right, I'm gonna propose my release from my development site no matter what it is based on the existing 2-year, do you ever have a problem with that?
No, I mean,
No, that's why I'm asking the question, because we were like, no, that seems pretty good.
Right.
But I don't know, to Steve's point, that's why I want to factor this in, that's why some of the analysis was, skimmed down or tried to, for digestion and stuff like that, so.
The example you gave with the narrow lot, with the 2-year, 24-hour release rate, that works out to be what Kane County uses about 0.1 CFS per acre. Because that you've got 0.8 versus 7.6 acres. I mean, coincidentally, but,
yeah, in this
but
example, that's what the
it just helps justify that 2-year, 24-hour. At least in my mind, you're getting into that ballpark of what would be a 100-year detention release.
Puts a lot of emphasis on how one would calculate the 2-year, 24-hour existing conditions.
Also existing, critical, and all of that, but that's why we want to have those tools in the spreadsheets at the point. And have you click on it, you get a tributary area, you get a flow path, right? And then if we trim down those curve number options, then we can feel comfortable that there's less variability. Because even right now, I sometimes I'm like, how is this person justifying curve number 55? Like, yeah, they printed all this stuff out, but I'm like, come on, there's, but I can't say no potentially because they printed out their soils data and it's in, it's a B and this and that, and, you take all of that into account. But so, I battle that currently. So I think we can propose and have variability between the existing and the curve number, increasing the curve number due to stuff like compaction, you're losing volume, storage there in your soils, right? So that makes sense when the area is being worked on, temporary areas, laid down areas, equipment. So, okay, I've lost a lot of people. Thank you to everyone. I think to just finalize and summarize, I think what I'll do is take some more specific examples, run critical durations for you guys, and try to really give scenarios. Here's a 2-acre site, and give some real life scenarios and some varying town concentrations and show. And I'm gonna do the same thing. First I'll run through and see if they meet the exemption or not, so you guys can see that, and then if they don't, what that allowable release rate is. So yeah, in a lot of these scenarios, your allowable release rates are, in the solar farm, we would be looking at these numbers as opposed to, 12.45, or if you apply it individually to 30 acres, 4 per type of thing. But again, if you're basing it off of existing conditions and you're lowering it in the proposed, I think we can all feel comfortable you're making the situation better. But Okay, all right. And I will present this to MCSC, bring it back. So we'll try to get some more data in here. We'll try to develop some curve numbers for you guys and bring it full circle, do the whole thing, and you guys can, again, I encourage you, email me. If you have a specific scenario you'd like me to run, send me some of that. If you got a site you're working on, again, I don't want to, disclose anything legally, but maybe just give me some of the raw numbers that you're looking at potentially. I can, punch it in and run it. That's where I'm looking to you guys to essentially, like, what's on your mind? What piece isn't quite fitting well because you're thinking of that scenario that I'm not, and we want to flesh that out.
Kind of circling back to what Ernie said, how many permitting actions, you said you couldn't quantify the number that would use the exemption, but how many total actions per year do you have that are stormwater involved? Not like building permits, but the.
Stormwater permits?
Yes.
This year with our online permitting system, I think we've averaged like 150. I think we're getting close to 300. Building permits, we average maybe 1,000. We're at like 1,500. And we missed a couple of months there where we're implementing the system. So what we did find is people are submitting on like a Saturday at 2 in the morning. So the ease of which you can submit an application is driving a lot of this. People no longer have to spend their working time 8 to 4:30 to try to come in. They can try to apply off hours, all kinds. So we have seen quite the increase. I don't have the numbers or the percentage, but yeah.
Thanks.
All right, well with that, I guess we can move straight to adjournment, unless anybody has any announcements.
Motion to adjourn.
Okay, made by Darren, seconded by Mike.
Gee, that was quick.
All in favor?
Aye.
Ayes have it. We are adjourned.
For the non-modeling people, how much more effort is required for critical duration? I was inferring that it must be rigorous.